Hello, Clayton Vance here. I'm a licensed architect, and one of my fascinations is about stone. And what we're going to be talking about in this little series, just this little educational series, is stone and why we can't seem to get the results that we used to historically. There's some very obvious reasons we don't, and that's because stone walls are no longer stone walls, but just a veneer on a framed wall or metal stud wall or something like that. And because it's not an actual stone wall, masons no longer have to put the stone on the way they used to, and since they don't have to, they don't. And what that does visually, it just makes it look fake, and there's this sense of fakeness, this inauthentic look that we just have, I think, grown accustomed to over time, and we just accept the fact that, oh, it's stone, so it's nice, whereas it's like, it's stone for it's nice, but it's not beautiful. And stone that's applied in a manner that would functionally and structurally work reaches a level of craftsmanship and artistry and beauty that stone walls today just don't seem to approach. And so if you're a stonemason who isn't as good as you should be, then honestly, let's look at some of these principles in terms of a random rubble pattern wall and how it's installed and why it would be installed the way it's installed. And here's my disclaimer: I'm not a stonemason, so I don't know all the ins and outs. But I started my quest for, just understanding this authentic architecture and beauty and all that type of stuff with the question of, why do walls that were built 100 years ago seem to age with grace and look better as they get older, rather than the walls that are made today just they look cheap and don't age as well. And it has to do with many factors, some of which we'll discuss today. But there are answers, and we can get better. And all it is a matter of just educating ourselves and committing ourselves to improving our craft, regardless of whether we're a designer, an architect, or the actual craftsman, the stonemason, or the general contractor. But if you're an owner contemplating doing stone on your house, make sure you find a mason who understands the principles of historic wall construction, so that when they put the stone on your house or your building, commercial building, or whatever it is, that it ends up being authentic. And even if it isn't entirely a stone wall, it can look like a stone wall. And let's get into it. I've got up here a photograph, an image that I took up in my trip to Alaska last year, and there was their old historic building that was their town hall, obviously a big, strong stone building, and you can look at it on the right. And then on the left is a modern addition, which is honestly pretty dang good. It's really, really nice, but there's some subtleties about it that are missing, that subconsciously we register as not authentic. And it's one of these tiny, subtle little things that we can get better at if we want to. So let's look at this wall, how it be constructed, and when you do random rubble, as this wall is, you first have a foundation, and that's how any building starts. You start with a foundation. And if you look at this image, you can notice a line right here. And that line, everything above it is what would be considered just the wall, and everything below it would be the foundation wall and foundation. And what's interesting is you look at the color of stone. The color of stone is slightly different. My guess, since I'm not a stonemason, but my guess is that stone that was used for the foundation wall is actually a different kind of stone that's probably higher in compressive strength, and it wears better in underground and kind of that freezing, thawing cycle of water, and how it reacts with water and how it reacts with the mortar around it. My guess is it's just a lot more durable. So, but what you do see is a very specific line, and that would have been, the first section of work, phase 1, done, and that line is very flat and very straight. If we look over here at the new stuff, we also have a line, but it exists slightly lower, and that is the top of the concrete foundation wall. And when you look at it, I'll take that line back off, you can see how the stone overhangs it. If I were to look at this in section, this stone is overhanging that wall, looks like about 2 inches. And because inside you'd have a stud wall, and then you'd have your sheathing, and then you'd have an air gap or something, and your moisture barrier, and then you have your stone. And down here you have this little piece of flashing so that if water gets behind and in that crack between the stud wall and your other wall, water can get out. And that's why we have these gaps. There's nothing you can do about those gaps. Or is there? No, there isn't. But we can actually talk about in another video techniques to face foundation walls properly so that you can get a water table effect or a real looking, an authentic looking foundation wall effect. It's the biggest thing you cannot do when you're putting stone below grade is you can't have it the thin veneer. If it's a thin veneer stone that's like, you know, an inch and a half thick, and it's sitting under those moisture conditions below grade, I think you're just going to run into issues and it's going to pop off all the time. It's not going to serve you well. And so if you're doing stuff below grade, really make sure it's a full bed masonry, like 4 inches thick, something like that. And that'll probably survive and be a lot more durable and look a lot better too. So there's one big difference that you honestly, you probably wouldn't have noticed if you were to look at these unless I were to specifically ask you, but it's a big difference that subconsciously makes you realize that this is not really authentic stone, whereas this one, yeah, that's a legit stone wall. So now let's look at the next phase and how they would construct this wall. And I said, so they'd do this in lifts, and each lift is completely flat, then they have these risers that would connect one day's work to another day's work, one lift to another lift. And you can see it right here. And so you have this big cornerstone. All the time in random rubble or any masonry, the thickest stones are at the openings at the corners. And those are the first stones that get put down. And those stones are absolutely critical because of what it does is it creates that vertical straight line that is the corner of the building. And that is why those cornerstones are the most important and the most critical and should be the largest. And so when you're doing a random rubble pattern, and I'm sorry on this picture I don't have an outside corner for this other one, but pretend this inside corner is the outside corner. Because even when you have an inside corner, there's still an outside corner to the inside. It's just that the outside corner on that return would be on the inside of the building rather than the outside. But the corner is still the corner regardless of whether it's of how those stones are positioned. And those corners have to have the thickest stones because those are the stones that actually connect the two walls together. And so when you look at these, let's look at this corner. Look how thick these stones are. Look how big they are, how massive they are. And this is one of the things that make this look completely authentic, is the thickness and substantialness of these stones. You can look at the thing that I just drew and it looks like an old historic, what would be called coins. And we can get into that some other time. But really what I want to look at right now is this little section right here, this line. This would have been 1 day's worth of work, is that line. And right here is what would have been a riser. And you see how it breaches that line for the day's worth of work? And that would have tied the next day's worth of work together with the previous day's worth of work. And so you can see this one, that course line, and it hits that sill, which is enormous on this building. And then it just keeps going until it hits the next sill. I think there's another window right there. And it's fascinating because you can see these course lines. This one kind of jogs a little bit and it goes really crazy wacky right here. But you can see that as someone is building up a corner or an edge, what will happen is they will put that stone on, then that stone on, and then this one, then this one, and then this one. Then they're trying to figure out how to build this opening. And so they're going to be going in a fashion like in this angle. And And that is how you physically have to construct a wall that is an actual masonry wall. You have to do it in courses. And so there's very specific course lines that you can see with these risers that pop up. And riser, course line, riser. And it continues, and then you have these lintels. Whereas if we go and try to do this exercise on the left, we can't. For instance, one of the first things that you see is that all of the stones on this other side, I'll make it a little darker, are all pretty much the same size. You have some smaller ones, but there isn't the same sort of variety and variation in terms of the overall size. And it doesn't have nearly as many long ones. The variation on the right in the authentic wall is much larger than the variation on the left. And you have this line right here, which should be a coursing line, which should be straight, but it's not straight. It weaves up and down, weaves up and down. And then as I continue to try to look across this, I actually can't see any actual course lines that are straight. And that's the difference. These course lines over here, they're straight, because it's the level of a single day's worth of work. Whereas over here, you don't have to do that, and you just get random rubble. So it's still kind of the same concept, but not really. And you put it in just a random pattern, whatever fits, but they're all kind of the same, and they don't tie together the same way that this other wall ties together. And I'm struggling here because there are no course lines. It just, this one's almost it, but it's still not flat. And I don't want to take away anything from the guys who actually did this, because it is good. It's some of the better stuff I've seen. But over here on the corner, look how small most of these things are still. Those should be some of the larger stones, because they're going to be tying that wall and that wall together. Also at the openings, look at the size of those versus some of the sizes of these. Openings, larger. All the stuff in the middle, smaller. The other thing, opening size. Look how big that is versus this opening size in terms of the width. And they have a joint right there. This would have been okay if you would have put a piece of stone right there that would have held up that joint. But because there's no stone right there, there's something about that no longer looks authentic, because you know in your heart of hearts, subconsciously, that this type of thing actually can't exist. This condition right here, in that opening, these two stones right here would completely just fall over. So this has been a little bit long and a little bit tedious, but fascinating if you're interested in this kind of thing. So we're going to keep going with other walls. If you want to keep analyzing and evaluating other walls, if you want to become an expert in being able to differentiate the historic with the new, and if you're building a house or a contractor and you want to make sure that your stone guys know what they're talking about and are doing it accurately, watch these videos. Let's do this together, and let's improve the beauty of our world together, because this is really important. If you're going to spend the money to do stone, do it right. So we'll continue. Come back and watch another one. This is Clayton Vance. See you later next time.